A spree killer. By definition, a person who kills multiple people in a short period of time, but in more than one event. Spree murderers are two or more murders committed by an offender or offenders without a cooling off period. A mass murderer. By definition, a person who kills 4 or more people in one event. A serial killer. By definition, anyone who kills 2 or more people with time in between the murders. The unlawful killing of 2 or more victims by the same offender or offenders in separate events, separate occasions, cooling off period, and emotional cooling off period. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dark Crossroads. This is your host, Roxanne Fletcher, and today we are excited to have our first guest on the podcast. She has a wide range of experience, but is coming on the show today because she is the author of a book titled Serial Killers, Then and Now. Briar Lee Mitchell interviewed over 20 serial and rampage killers to gain insight into their lives as of today. Some of these people have been incarcerated for decades, and their outlook on life, their crimes, and what purpose they might have was discussed between them and Briar. Today, we learn about her book and the experiences she went through to write it.
I am so delighted to be the very first guest on the amazing Dark Crossroads podcast. I'm very excited about being here today, and I'm very excited to be here with Roxanne. Let's see. I worked my entire life as an artist and a writer for 43 years. I retired a few years ago, and I decided to write full-time. By artist, I mean did medical biological, and I also worked for most of the major studios, Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney's, worked on Quest for Camelot, worked on The Iron Giant, Pinky and the Brain, Sylvester Tweety Mysteries, and then I would go back into doing more medical and forensic illustration work. It was a wonderful back and forth between the fun entertainment work and then the more serious forensic and medical illustration work that I would do. The first true crime book I worked on was the FBI firefight that took place in Miami in 1986 between William Maddox and Michael Platt, two bank robbers / serial killers. FBI actually two agents pulled her behind them on one of the busiest days of the year in Miami, called on the radio to the other agents, oh my God, there they are. I've listened to the recording so many times, it's just gut-wrenching. They tried to force these two men off the road to just arrest them, thinking that, all these FBI agents descending on them, they would stop, but no. There were 8 agents, all these cars, and then 2 bad guys, and they came out shooting. The firefight only lasted a couple of minutes, and at the end of it, 2 FBI agents had been shot dead. 5 had been critically wounded. And William Maddox, shot 5 times in the head, kept going until he finally succumbed. Michael Platt, was shot 12 times. And he actually kept going and tried to steal one of the FBI agent's cars. He was still alive when the EMTs even got there. It was an amazing watershed case for the FBI to then arm them better, give them better armament. Only one agent was wearing a vest. Kevlar vest. It was just not a really good day for the FBI, and they've made a huge amount of changes since then. So that was my first introduction to doing true crime years ago with Dr. French Anderson. And I started on this book. I've written over 20 novels, fiction and nonfiction. My website is briarmitchell.com. That's B as in boy, RIAR Mitchell.com. And I think like a lot of people, true crime has always fascinated me, and because I do have an interest in it and had worked on a couple of true crime books, the other major book I worked on was one of the OJ books called OJ is Guilty but Not of Murder. The main author, William C. Deere, detective out of Dallas, his theory was that OJ's oldest son committed the murders. It's really quite a remarkable book to work on. When I started to work on this true crime one about serial killers, I really just wanted to talk to them. I wanted to know if I could get a glimpse at what made them serial killers or rampage killers. Had an opportunity to get to know several FBI agents very well while working on that book. And I also, for 10 years, worked in canine search and rescue. And most search dogs in this country, all in the world actually, are owned and operated, if you will, by volunteers. And I had 2 dogs that I ran for 10 years. One was a beautiful blonde lab named Psyche, who was my live find dog. And I had a cadaver dog named Thor, who was a gorgeous, huge black Staffordshire Terrier mix, and he was a really good cadaver dog. He found 2 men in Florida, and on a case up in Georgia, we were able to recover the cell phone of a man who had died. We found his body in a farmer's field, and I miss it tremendously. I did it for 10 years, but I just finally was physically not able to do it anymore.
Right.
And it just broke my heart to have to retire from it. And it's amazing when you go out. I would have my dog, and if you can imagine, you just killed somebody. Where am I going to put that body? Well, it's going to be in the most remote place you can reach. Mm-hmm. So we would be, swamps or in the mountains, and most of the times in the search, I'd give my dog his release, his command, which was Find Debbie, which was short for DD or dead body. So off he'd go to find Debbie, and he and I would cover miles going through swamps. And they don't bother me, the snakes, the gators, none of that. Just off we would go. It was so fascinating watching the dogs work. And when he would make a find during training, it's a rush. But when he found those missing men in the middle of nowhere, it was just such a remarkable experience. And so I was grateful to get to know so many people in law enforcement and to see how they worked. And on some of the searches I was on, there'd be as many as, a dozen dog teams, many horse riders, ATV, uniformed officers, FBI agents, because most of the cases that my dogs and I were on were missing persons, probably due to a homicide, or sometimes suicide. Occasionally would be like the one man in Georgia, he had a brain aneurysm and just dropped dead, unfortunately, in that field, but we're glad we found him. But that gave me more first-hand experience with crime and true crime and being privy to actual cases, especially murder cases and serial killers. One of them was a big serial killer case up in South Carolina. I was on 2 searches for looking for victims for this guy, and I can't talk about it because the case is still open and they're still looking for him. Right. Thankfully, they've recovered one of the victims, but that was, a real solid introduction to first-hand handiwork from serial killers, being out there looking for their victims with my dogs.
I imagine it must have been very rewarding, bringing closure.
To some of them, yeah, absolutely. When your dog makes a find, and in some of the cases, the family members would actually be there with us. And my heart would just break for them, because here be these people, they would pull on these monkey boots and they didn't care. They were out there in the middle of the muck and mire with us looking for their family member. And I just, anytime I'd start to get a little tired, or I'd think, okay, I'll do some more. No, I would just keep going, because there would be the mom or a sister right there with us. And, you just do your all for somebody who's missing a family member. I can't even imagine. I can't. It was an interesting time. I've got some amazing, wonderful memories of doing that. It wasn't that long ago. I only had retired about 3 years ago, but I certainly absolutely missed it. When I made a decision a year ago to start this book, I reached out to one serial killer. I thought, okay, there's a good chance they're not even going to talk to you, because they get, as I'm sure you imagine, they get inundated by fans who write to them constantly, and they want things from them. They want a piece of their hair. They want a letter handwritten. They want hand tracing. They want artwork. They want all kinds of things for their personal collections or to sell. What's called murderabilia, where you can buy and sell things from serial and rampage killers. But I wasn't interested in that. When I started thinking about the book, I didn't want to rehash, okay, the crimes have been so well documented. There's documentaries, there's video games. movies, TV shows, you name it, plus the many, many websites and the Facebook pages, all these people talking about these things. What was I going to be able to add to that? Nothing. So I let it rattle around for years, thinking I'm going to eventually figure out what I might want to do. And a friend of mine who's retired deputy from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office that's here in Florida had actually transported 3 of the most notorious serial killers. And she told me about her experiences with them. And one of them was Bobby Joe Long. The other one was Eileen Warnos, and then Oscar Ray Bowen Jr. And those were the 3 that she had regular contact with for a while. And she didn't talk about their personalities. I asked her, well, what was it like being with them? And she said they talked about everything but the crime. And it was fascinating to me that she had an insight into their makings, their brain thinking, whatever it is that makes them the tiger, the monster, the dragon that they are. And they came down and just, on her level, speaking as 2 human beings. And I wanted to just talk to them and ask them questions about who they are now and leave it at that. Some of them have been incarcerated for decades. Monk Steppenwolf, he's up in Michigan, 52 years now behind bars. Or it might even be 57 at this point. And Gene Giles, he's over in Daytona Beach. Met with him a couple of times, interviewed him. 50 years now he's been behind bars.
I asked Briar if she had met with him in person, and if so, what that experience was like.
Yeah, some of them I did. Yeah. Others I would speak to regularly on the phone. Every Saturday afternoon, for example, I talk with Dennis Rader.
Wow.
Dennis calls me in the evening, and we talk every Saturday, and we have for a year. Talk about everything and anything. I personally, I find documentaries fascinating. I do. All kinds of documentaries, not just about true crime or serial killers. Science, the occult, you name it. Documentaries to me are fascinating because of the research and the telling of the story so that you learn something. To me, it's a fascinating medium. But I am really turned off by people who interview serial killers and push them or try to hurt them to get a rise out of them. And it's just so false. It's just, wow, why would you do that? We already know they're killers. They'll tell you. Every single one of them. Every time I ask them, are you a murderer? Yes, I'm a murderer. It was never even a question. They know why they are where they are, whether it's on death row or they're doing life behind bars. They had no problem with it. It was amazing to me. The serial killers were all very calm. Most of them were really funny. I mean, seriously funny, wicked sense of humor. And if you just talk with them and listen to them, and I asked them questions. For example, I wanted to be able to break the ice and ask questions that I felt were non-threatening, but were interesting. Like, when you pass, and if you have a tombstone, what would you want written on that tombstone? And that question really threw them. They were like, I never even thought about that. Or I'd ask them, are you afraid of that? The tombstone one got some really interesting responses. My favorite one from Steve Jefferson. He's the happy face killer. He was the first one I interviewed, by the way. And I did go to Oregon, and I did meet with him a few times in person. But he wants on his tombstone, I loved them to death. And then I asked them also, what would you like people to know the most about you? Everybody knows already that you're a killer, you're a murderer, but what do you want them to know about you as a human being? And that one threw them also. They were like, And again, going back to Steve Jefferson, his answer was, I'd love for people to know that I love my children and value them more than anything on the entire planet. And I'd like for people to know that I love my children and I tried to be a good father. I didn't want to evoke responses from them. I just not equipped to deal with that in the first place. I was panicking just, I was really wanting to know if they would just talk about themselves. And what they ultimately shared with me was warm, compassionate. A couple of times it gets a little weird and scary, but you got to remember who it is I was talking with. And I found a huge difference between the rampage killers and the serial killers. That to me was really fascinating. I interviewed a little over 20 of them. The serial killers are really laid back, calm, funny, quiet people. not the rampage killers. Every single one I talked to talked 90 miles an hour and just frantic sounding in the way they write, the way they talk. It was remarkable to me, and that may just be the small group of people I talked with, or that could be indicative of the real difference between the two.
I find that very interesting also. It could be that the certain personality that they have.
It does. That personality they have sort of feeds into that frantic method of communication. And with every single one of them, and I interviewed a few of them. I interviewed Nick Chile. Nicholas is in Joliet Prison in Illinois. He killed 10 people with a hammer, including a little 2-year-old boy. And he did it out of rage, just absolute blind rage over a few days. And Scott McCrae, he's known as the Steel Beast Killer, was mad at his wife. The courts gave their son to his wife, and the son kept coming home with bruises and at one point a broken arm. And the father's trying to tell the authorities, you can't let our son stay with her, he's getting beaten up, and they wouldn't listen to him. And he finally got a gun and shot every single person between him and his wife in a beauty parlor, Steel Beach, which is in California. I think it was 8 people, and even shot to death a person who happened to be parked next to his car. He was in an absolute blind rage. And Nico Jenkins is also a good example. He's a spree killer, rampage killer. And when I talked to him on the phone, he was really fast, frantic, non-stop talking. And then I would ask the question, and he would go dead silent. And think about the answer. And then he would answer my question. And then he'd go back to talking about 8 or 10 different things at once. Nico is a very interesting-looking guy. He's African-American, very light-skinned. And he's got his entire head shaved and tattooed with red and black Egyptian lettering. He believes he is the son of Isis, and goddess, and that the god Apis speaks to him and tells him to kill people. And he believes that he is schizophrenic, and he says that voices are telling him who and when and what to kill, and kind of an interesting conversation with Nico. So there's something to the book here about him as well.
I asked Briar if at any point she felt scared, she felt uncomfortable, or threatened by the people that she was interviewing.
That's a really good question. When I met with the ones I did in person or on the phone, no. It was really interesting. I thought for sure that there might be some, gut level, get ready to run sort of feeling.
Right.
Because I was in touching distance of somebody who had killed multiple people, and pretty much all of them had been women in brutal ways. No. The only time I was ever afraid was I was on the phone with one of them, and he, for like 0.3 of a second, lost his temper and shouted at me on the phone. And it happened 3 times to me with a couple different people, and when it did happen, it was terrifying. Just that amount of anger and rage in less than a second, and then it was gone again. And that happened briefly, but I did glimpse it and experience that. Sort of like Todd Kohlhepp describes it. He says it's like you got to touch the tiger. Well, if you touched the tiger was sleeping and you woke it up and it suddenly turned on you, imagine how you might feel. That was how I felt for those 2 seconds when that anger was expressed. And it wasn't even directly at me. It was just in regard to a comment or a question I'd asked. But no, overall, I wasn't afraid of any of them. If any of them escaped and they came and knocked on my front door, I might make them a coffee, while I called the authorities. The similarities I had touched on a little bit about the kind of laid-back personality the serial killers have versus the rampage killers, who tend to be a little more frantic. But I'm going to tell you, every single one of them, remarkably different. And I attributed that to the reasons that they killed. I talk about it in the book. There are kind of 4 different categories for serial killers. There's mission-oriented. Those are primarily the ones who are, usually it's the racist group that are in there. They see a biracial couple, well, they're going to go kill them. or they see a black person, okay, you're dead. That's that kind of thing. You have the visionary ones, those are the ones like I was talking about with Nico, but mostly like Herbert Mullen, who would hear voices. Herbert recently died, he just died last year, and he killed a lot of people. He killed 13 people. He had voices in his head telling him to do that, and if he didn't kill them, then a massive earthquake would destroy California. That's why Herbert did what he did. And he had been watching the news at night. This was during the Vietnam War. And as the United States started to pull out of the war, the number of American casualties started to go down. Well, that really concerned Herbert. He was sure that we were headed for doom and gloom. The voices said to him, okay, Herbert, you need to pick up the slack and start going out and killing people, or a major earthquake's going to slam California and drop it into the ocean. I had one of his charts. He would draw these very elaborate charts that would have to do with waxing and waning of the moon and how it related to the earthquakes and the number of people. And he would always be the same sort of way, like, you're welcome. You're welcome that I killed those people. I saved all of us. That was such an interesting character. I tried to interview him. I asked him to, but I think his health is already pretty severely declined by the time I was able to get my letter to him. So I'm sorry I never got a chance to talk with her, but interesting character.
Yeah. At this point, I ask, if at any point while interviewing these individuals, did her view on society change? Did the way that she see the world around her change? Or did her life stay the same?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. You got a question about that? Wow. While I was writing it and meeting them and just documenting what they were saying, no, I wasn't doing too bad, but a friend of mine said to me, the average person in their lifetime can probably be standing next to or walking right by about 7 or 8 murderers and not even know it. And that's true. You could be standing in line at the grocery store and the guy behind you could have just ops his whole family. You just don't know. That to me was interesting. And when I interviewed them and spoke with them, and some of them I spoke with a lot, every instinct that I thought I had for self-preservation, nothing frightened me, nothing bothered me. I never felt like I was ever in the presence of an evil person. And it was like, it could have been the person next to me in the grocery store. There was no difference in their behavior or personality. Now, some of the people who are very schizophrenic, yeah, but that could apply to anybody who has a mental disorder. But I got to tell you, after talking with so many of them, anybody out there, anybody you walk into or you bump into or you talk to, could be a serial killer. The personalities just aren't any different at all. I don't know if that is scary or not, but that was my experience.
Every time I leave, I communicate with my family. I'm leaving at this time. I'm going this place. It made me very much more aware of my surroundings. I would see people that normally I would have just struck up a conversation with in the grocery store, and I would just instantly run down another aisle or just really try to ignore it. I was so afraid of everything around me.
I don't know. I was thinking about that when that friend of mine, I was standing outside and describing to him what it was like, this recent conversation. He said, well, you could be standing next to a killer, when you're getting gas.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you certainly could be. It certainly could happen. We're figuring out how to look after ourselves in what could be a rather dark world. Out of total fairness, though, I did cover all these things in the book. However, there's a section in the book where I actually describe and explain what a serial killer is versus what a rampage killer is, the difference between the two. And I have a whole section in that one chapter on what is a serial killer. What are the odds of being killed by one? And they are so tiny It is so infinitesimal. It's just amazing. Yeah, we could be standing next to a murderer, or you could be standing next to a serial killer. But the odds of you becoming a victim are so minuscule. And you look at some of the numbers of things that can kill you, like being killed by a coconut or a toilet before a serial killer. So it's fascinating, but because they're human beings, and I'm a human being.
Right.
It's like, do I have that in me? Do I have that in me to go and kill 14 people? It doesn't. I actually have the numbers and their statistics, and it's like 0.003 or something like that. It actually has to do also with your age range and your lifestyle.
Right.
And the statistics say, well, if you're over 40 and you kind of stay home a lot, you're really not going to be a serial killer. That's the information I came up with. And okay, I'm safe.
I was just thinking that too. I'm like, I'm good.
I'm safe as a serial killer. Now, people wonder, okay, this was an interesting bit of information I did come up with while I was talking with serial killers and doing research about them. There was the so-called golden age of serial killers, and I'm sure you've probably come across that term with all the different pathways that you've gone down with true crime and so forth. That took place like the 1950s, 1960s to the 80s. And we're talking John Wayne Gacy, Gary Ridgway, Richard Ramirez, Dennis Rader, that crew. There were 8 of them in this group called the Golden Age of Serial Killers. Jeffrey Dahmer was one of them. And then what caused that? That was the really interesting thing for psychologists at the time. Why were these 8 guys able to do so much damage over such a massive amount of time? I mean, it took 28 years to catch Gary Ridgway. He killed nearly 80 women. And Dennis Rader, 34 years, I believe it was, to catch him. And he's like, what? Oh my God, why would it take, this is just insane. This is insane that it takes so long to do all of this. Well, there's an author named Peter Blonsky, and I read through quite a bit of this information. His theory is, and if you look at his theory and you kind of look at the times of the country, men returning from World War II and Korean War especially were so traumatized, and there was a condition called PTSD, which we recognize today as being truly a viable clinical situation where somebody with PTSD can just, that's why you don't shoot fireworks off around you people, or pretend there's a explosion or something, that you don't know what's going to set them off because they're still that fragile. Well, you had people returning from World War II that it was called shell shock. And it was just, okay, well, just get over it, okay? And it affected a lot of people. And the theory is that the amount of pain and suffering in this country, in the United States, and I was just referencing serial killers and rampage killers in the U.S., driven mostly by the amount of PSD in this country from returning vets. And William Bonin is a great example of that. William Bonin was the freeway killer in California, targeted young men, would rape them and then kill them and toss their bodies out along the roadways. He was beaten so badly by his father, who was a returning World War II vet, that it actually killed part of Bill's brain. Part of his brain was beaten to death by his own father, who was a World War II vet. And part of that actually contributed to William's remorseless killing. He had no remorse. He had none. He didn't have any emotional response whatsoever to what he did. So when I was researching this, and I thought, okay, well, are we done with serial killers then? Is that it? There's still some out there. There's usually like 25 or 30 operating supposedly in the U.S. at any given time. With some other critical things that have happened in this country, specifically the financial crisis of 2008. People lost their homes. They lost everything. You have massive national hysteria and angst building up again. So the theory is within the next, I want to say 3 to 5 years or so, you may see an increase in the number of serial killers.
After hearing this, I thought to myself, as I watched the news lately, I noticed there has been more violence, more people dying, and more people going missing, all for senseless reasons. You were talking about like John Wayne Gacy and all those serial killers around like the 60s, 70s. I had read somewhere that another person kind of had this theory that they went so long without catching a lot of them because they were all operating around the same time in the same areas in almost the same way.
The other thing they would do too, Roxanne, is they would look at each other's press.
Exactly.
One of them would look and see, oh my God, so-and-so got caught. How did they get caught? How did they get caught? How are they caught? And they would learn how to avoid apprehension and how to hide the crimes better too by following each other.
Yeah, they fed off of each other.
And Dennis still does it. Rader, he still does it. His favorite is Crept, Randy Crept, and he reads every book he can about the guy. And when I'll ask him, I said, well, Dennis, do you feel like you and Randy are the same? And he said, well, there were brain scans done of Crept that showed differences in a serial killer's brain versus, I'm going to say, normal. Maybe not normal in other ways, but we'll go with that. And there were big differences. And Dennis said to me at one point, he said, I'll bet you anything, Briar, if I had a brain scan done, my brain would look exactly like Randy Crept. They were born the same month, the same year. They had similar lives growing up. Dennis Rader was a sexual sadist. Randy Crept certainly is. And I asked Dennis, I said, well, you have told so many people, Dennis, that you were inhabited by a demon, that you were influenced by demonic forces. He had claimed when he was about 3 years old, a demon entered his body, and he would call this demon Factor X. And he sometimes called it Batter, B as in boy, A-T-T-R, Batter, or the Minotaur. He refers to all serial killers as Minotaurs. He referred to himself as the Minotaur of Wichita. But when I said to him, I said, well, how would your brain scan look the same as Randy's then if you were influenced by a demon? Are you thinking then that Randy was or is? Because, I'll bet you anything he's possessed also. That's not a conversation you have with everybody every day. Hearing his theory about why Randy killed. And I asked him, I said, well, where's your demon? He said, I don't know, but since I've been incarcerated, which is 17 years now, he left. I think, well, I would probably leave too. But Dennis suffers from what's called pareidolia. And everybody has it to some extent. Like you can look at a cloud and you see, oh, it looks like a dog. Okay, well, then you see a shape that to you looks like something you would know in real life, in this case, the dog. And some people have it to such an extent they will look at anything, a floor, a wall, anything that has a little bit of variation in the surface, and you can start to see things in it. And he sees demons. He, in his cell, will see demons all day long. He talks to them. And he'll do drawings of them. He sent me several drawings of them. There's Prunehead. There's the shark creature. His favorite is the werewolf. And he's got done the drawing. And I asked him, did you talk to them? He goes, no, not really. I just see them. But then he has admitted that he does sometimes talk to the demons that share his cell. His cell is tiny, cement, little tiny window, and he's got a full metal door. So he can't, there's no bars in front. He can't see anybody. He can't. It's just him in there. And a little tiny slot in the door they use to push the food trays through. They call that the beam hole. But that's, But the second age of serial killers, I think yes and no. I think that times of national trauma like 9/11, like the events, the financial crisis of 2008, there's a few things that have happened in this country that have really shaken everybody up. And that gets translated into relationships between family members, and the theories about where and why serial killers come from are just, you can come across a new one every day if you want to. I think this is the reason why. And you asked me at one point how different they were from each other or were there similarities. The only real similarities was how calm and funny the serial killers were. But each one of them had a remarkably different personality based on the reasons they killed. Some of them psychotic. Some of them just mean as hell. They just liked to kill. They just liked it. Some of them would be whatever it was, a trigger, if you will. Keith Jesperson, I talked about him quite a bit. And there's a lot about him in the book because he and I met several times and we talked probably 2 or 3 times a week and have for about a year. So able to accrue quite a bit of information. And he'll tell you he's comfortable with his guilt. He knows he killed. He doesn't have a problem with it. When you ask him, well, why did you kill all those women? And his answer is always the same. He was putting them out of their misery. He seemed to feel that there was something in their lives that was so tragic and so bad they couldn't go on living, so he did them a big. A couple of them were prostitutes. Mostly what would happen is they would just tick him off. They would say something to him that would make him mad, and a minute or less later they would be dead. He would kill them with his bare hand. He's huge. He's 6'6", and right now he's about 340 pounds. He's a huge, huge man, gigantic hand. And what he would do is he'd make a fist with his big hand and lock his elbow and just push his fist right into their throat until he broke everything and choked them. He tried choking with his hands, like you wrap your hands around someone's neck. That's really hard to do, actually. And he found a way to do it that would kill them very quickly. And that was his reasoning why. It didn't matter what the problem was. It was their fault that they were dead, but he was doing them a favor by putting them out of the misery. His last victim was his fiancée. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, well, how are you putting her out of her misery? And I said to him something along the lines of, because she was engaged to you. And that's getting a little close to the line there. It was funny, but not, I was like, let's see what he says. And he actually cracked up with that. And he said, no, I was afraid she was going to try and take away all of the money that I'd earned over the years. And some other reasoning. It was whatever. He had to kill this woman. And all of it's tragic. None of it's funny. They can be funny people, personalities, funny-wise. The book, by the way, the dedication of the book reads, dedicated to those who met the monsters. And they are. These people that kill serial killers or rampage killers. We all as human beings are capable of killing. That's just part of being a human being. You can kill to defend yourself, or what amazes most of us about serial killers is they do it for recreation, most of them. Trying to understand why killing somebody is entertaining kind of throws most of us off. Although I feel I could be capable of defending myself, or if I was with family and friends, and clearly am in danger that I could defend them.
At this point, I tell Briar that I can understand that in the right circumstances, anyone could possibly commit an act such as murder, whether it be for self-protection or for something else similar. But what I can't wrap my head around are the people who kill other human beings as if it was for sport, or the ones that hunt and plan murders, sometimes for years on end, like it's a full-time job.
Full-time job aspect of it. I also asked all of the serial killers, were you glad that you were arrested? And that was where I had the similarities with them. At first, no, it was a shock. It's shock and awe. You're caught. You go through the whole court. It's just like you are overwhelmed with the system. And then all of a sudden, that desire to kill is gone. And I said, is that from incarceration or just going through the numbing process of court and then prison and knowing you're going to be behind bars the rest of your life? Nope, none of it had anything to do with it. They just, all of a sudden, that desire to kill was gone. And I can't tell you exactly why. I can just share with you what they told me. And I thought that was pretty interesting. That probably goes to why I really wasn't afraid being around them. But if I was in the truck stop and I was standing right next to the big happy-faced killer, and I stepped on his foot or something and made him mad, I wouldn't want to experience that kind of anger out there in the world. And with most of these serial killers, not a lot of people survived them.
Yeah.
Very few did. They killed with impunity and were shocked if somebody got away, and they were shocked when they were arrested. They just couldn't even believe it. Really interesting to hear them talk about those sorts of things. And it's interesting also to me that how accepting they are of where they are. They're bored to pieces, but they don't get into fights with people. They just try to get along as best they can where they are. And really, you don't really hear very much about serial killers after they're incarcerated. They're not killing other people. They're not getting into fights. They're not.
Thoughts that go through my head are, like, they knew, a part of them knew what they were doing, even if they didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, they knew what they were doing was wrong, and they knew that where they were going to end up eventually when they got found out. And I feel like they had made peace with that before they even started.
You know, I think in some instances, I could totally agree with that. One of the things that I encountered over the years working at different projects, this one plus the FBI book, there's psychopaths, which are primarily what serial killers are, remorseless psychopaths. And then you have sociopaths who have a less degree of violence to them, but they have this weird moral compass where their version of right and wrong is really different than, let's say, the average person's version of right or wrong.
Right.
And they also tend to feel like they're immortal. And sociopaths would frighten me more than a psychopath. The sociopaths were the two bank robbers I described that the FBI came up against in 1986. And as many times as those men were wounded, I mean, normally, if somebody shot me once, I would just stop. I would just boom. I'd be down on the ground like, okay, not 12 times, not 5 times in the head. The fact that they would keep going until they literally dropped dead is terrifying to me, absolutely terrifying. Because you can keep shooting them, and it's like Michael Myers, right? Michael Myers.
Right.
He will just keep getting up and coming at you, because that to me is, if I think of a sociopath, I think of Michael Myers. Until they literally physically drop dead, they are a profound, profound danger. Mm-hmm. The serial killers are remarkably different people. The FBI classifies a serial killer as somebody who kills at least 2 people, and I'll explain that too in just a second. But over a period of time, like, there's usually a cooling off between those. And so when you think of spree or rampage killers, yeah, that makes sense with the description. These people who pick up a gun, walk into a store or a church or a shopping mall or wherever, just open fire and take out as many people as they can until they themselves are brought down, suicide by cop, or they kill themselves. Serial killers, no, are quite different. They will kill, and then years can go by sometimes, and then they'll kill again. Or it can just be a matter of a couple of months. Can they work alone? Yeah. Do they work in pairs? Yeah. And do they work in bigger groups? Yeah, the zebra killers, for example, there were 4 of them. 4 of them. And they were all serial killers, the zebra killers in San Francisco years ago. All racially motivated killings. So that was the description provided by the FBI, along with all the different agencies they met with in Texas. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. The 2, if you imagine a serial killer working in a very backwater area where local law enforcement is real small and hasn't ever encountered this, if they have 2 killings, then the FBI can come in and help them. So they keep that number low so the FBI can go help if they need to, which is, I think, a good thing. I think that as we get closer to the so-called second golden age, there may be more serial killers. But the facts are that there are so many more ways to spot them and stop them now, that there are serial killers now being stopped after their second kill. So instead of like a Gary Ridgway where all of a sudden there's 70-plus bodies in the Green River, dozens of people dead from different serial killers, they're being stopped very quickly now because of DNA, modern scientific forensic techniques, and there are so many cameras out there now that they're much quicker to catch them. But on the other side of that killing coin, the rampage killers, in 2021, in just the U.S., there were 700 of them in 1 year, rampage killings. So I think that, I think we're going to continue to see serial killers. That's just part of being humans, that there's some of them in our midst that have fun doing this, and some of them plan, like Dennis Rader would plan, sometimes a year or longer he planned And he called them his projects, and then he would launch a project. And then you have other ones like Todd Kohlhepp. If you made him mad and he didn't see any other way to deal with you, boom, you were dead. He called it revoking your birth certificate. And boom, you were dead. Or William Deborah Howell, he was another one I interviewed. He's the sick ripper. He's incarcerated for life in Connecticut. And for him, it wasn't about killing. It was about raping. He would capture these victims, women, and rape them, sometimes over days. And what would happen then is he would finally have to kill them so they couldn't report his crimes. And he buried them behind a shopping mall. I think there were 7 of them. He had one person he picked up, thought it was a woman, turned out to be a transgender man. And the minute he saw that it was a man that was going to perform a sex act on him, he killed him instantly. Killed him. Boom. They're all very different.
I asked Briar if she ever got any requests from the individuals that she interviewed, such as asking for hair clippings or coffee, in exchange to communicate with her. And this was her response.
Oh, nope, none of them. No. And I would ask them, I said, can I bring you something? Can I bring you donuts? Can I bring you some donuts and coffee? No, don't need donuts and coffee. A t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a blanket, a jacket, food. Can I bring you something? Nope. It's because the prison, of course, won't let it in. But I would give them, I gave all of them some cash, not a lot, but enough to cover their expenses for phone calls or postage, things like that. But they weren't compensated financially. They weren't compensated with any goods. It was just conversations between the two of us. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I am a doctor. I'm an EDD. An EDD is a doctorate of higher education. My doctorate is in educational leadership, higher education. And I taught for many years, 16 years before I finally retired a few years ago. But I don't have, the credentials to walk in a person and say, I want to, ask you all these questions a psychiatrist would ask you, or a law enforcement person. I'm neither of those. I'm somebody who had a really unique interest and a very unusual background that has done some work in these areas. I'm just interested in knowing about you as a person, and that made all the difference in the world. I didn't treat them like a pariah. I didn't. I wasn't at all ever trying to instigate anything with them, to get them mad or upset, or try to get them to talk about things they didn't want to talk about. And I made it so clear to them, I said, if you don't want to answer any of my questions, then don't. If you want to just talk about other things, great. If you don't want to talk to me, I'm fine with that too. I'll still give you some money for the phone call and your postage for sending me your letter back. And that was it. Those were the basic initial conversations. And once they realized, oh my gosh, she's not trying to screw me out of something. And they do. Oh my God, people steal from them constantly. Think about where they are. Some of them have sort of a status because they're serial killers. And, we're going to give you your drugs for free in here. It's just crazy stuff like that.
Yeah.
They tend to leave them alone. They really don't want to see the tiger. They don't want to see the monster or the dragon come out because although they were very nice to me and answered most of my questions and were enjoyable to talk to, I know what they're capable of, and anybody who is talking with them would be really stupid to forget that.
Right.
So you just remember that is part of their personality, and I think those people who do try to provoke want to see the tiger come out or the monster come out or whatever you want to call it, and that isn't I don't think that's how it works, because you have to try to imagine, for me anyways, I would have to imagine, well, why did they kill that person in the first place? What did that person do? And that person could then have done something as innocuous as sneezed at the wrong time or just looked the wrong way at them, and boom, they're dead. So trying to instigate or to get a serial killer all worked up to maybe see that anger that caused them to kill another human being, you're not going to see that.
Yeah,
it isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen. So I wasn't even going to try to do that. I'd be like, what the hell are you doing? This is the stupidest thing ever. They're human beings. Ask them some questions. If they want to answer them, let them talk. And I did. And that's the whole background to the book. And there's a copy coming to you, so I can't wait to hear what you think about it. But, there's whole sections in the book where unlike a lot of writers, I didn't filter anything they told me. When they would respond to me, it was verbatim, right down to the street lingo for some of them. And you have to kind of pick your way through some of the things they're saying. Like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying here. And you can get it pretty quickly. But none of it has been rewritten or filtered in any way, shape, or form. The writing from me, my personal comments, are my personal experiences. The research, well, yeah, I've got a doctorate, so I know how to do research. That's in there, and it's documented as well. All of it's documented. And then you have the comments from the serial rampage killers, verbatim. I'm not going to try to say, oh, this is what they meant to tell you. This is what they said. You read it. You get from it what you think you can get from it. But they're sharing with you, via me, their personal thoughts about life and death and why they are where they are and what would they be doing if they were let out today, and just kind of basic common sense sort of questions. And I thought the answers were fascinating. I did.
Just letting listeners know that we will be attaching a link to Briar's website and to her book in case anybody wants to check it out or wants to reach out to her.
Yes, my website has an email form in there, and you can contact me. I have people, a lot of my readers do that. You can do so anonymously if you want to. I've had people contact me wanting signed copies of the book because they're fans of a certain killer or whatever. If you're going to send me the book, that's fine. I'll sign it for you. I don't have any problem doing that whatsoever. So I will also be updating information on that website about some missing, one missing victim from the Happy Face Killer. She's still missing 30 years now. Victim number 3. And then 2 of his victims are still unidentified, so I've been working with law enforcement, try to get them identified. And so updates on those cases will be posted on my website, and that's hopefully pretty clearly stated in the book. But anybody who has questions, I'm on Facebook, or you can send me an email. I find it a fascinating subject, and I'm happy to answer questions. I had a really good time coming on your show, and Roxanne, I wish you the best of luck, and look forward to seeing this show come out, but also I look forward to seeing your other programs come out.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Sharing of information, and that's really all we're doing.
Yes.
Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Dark Crossroads was written and produced by me, Roxanne Fletcher. Sources in this episode are FBI.gov and our guest, Briar Lee Mitchell. If you want to hang out some more, follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, visit our website and blog at www.darkcrossroadspodcast.com, and for extra goodies, join our Patreon. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.